Hi, and welcome back to Creative Live. You should all be getting used to my face. My name is Kate Dessa, and I am the host today for another new class from Lisa Carney. And we're really excited to be launching mobile photography, creating black and white images using Lightroom Mobile. This is Lisa's third class using the Lightroom Mobile app, and she is teaching us how to edit on the go, beautiful professional photos. And today we're talking about transitioning and creating stories through black and white photos. So, Lisa, without further ado, it's nice to have you back. How are you?
Hi, honey. Thanks for having me back. Good morning.
Yeah, it's so good to see you. So, Lisa, remind everyone where you're joining us from. I'm here in Nevada, and everybody else, please tell us where you're watching from. Lisa, you are in Truckee?
No, today I'm in LA. I'm in Pasadena area right now. So I split my
Ah,
time between Truckee and Los Angeles.
okay. Very nice. Very nice. You look like you're in the studio today.
I am, it's a grateful thing. A friend, our power is being repaired, and a friend of mine said he can come to his studio, and I think I'm gonna always come to his studio now.
Yeah,
I like the
awesome.
lighting.
So just as a reminder, you're all watching the live kickoff for Lisa's new class that is kicking off today. It is available for 24 hours as a free stream. So we're just going to tee you guys up and get you a little acquainted with what you're going to learn today. Lisa, this is your black and white Lightroom photography class. So tell us a little bit about what prompted this class for you.
Okay, thank you. Well, and thank you. And I'm so grateful to Creative Live for letting me do this class. Well, I have to say, I am primarily a black and white shooter. It's kind of how I like to tell
I was
stories.
going to
It's
say.
the way I like to see the world. And I have to say, I've always been that way. Even back in the days when I was shooting with film, I'm a black and white girl. And I have to say, I think people don't quite approach black and white mobile the way they could. And what I mean by that is there's traditional techniques you can use with mobile device, especially Lightroom. I mean, holy crap, Lightroom mobiles is amazing.
Yeah.
And so I just look forward to bringing more traditional thoughts or process to the digital.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so tell us, because I follow you and a lot of your photography is black and white. Tell us a little bit about, storytelling and creating imageries in terms of black and white versus color and how that goes into your process.
Yeah, so I have to say, I'm one of those obnoxious people. I have this with me at all times, and I shoot all the time. And I'm always looking for stories and looking at what's going on, what's happening in my life, what's happening around. And I find for me that black and white makes that narrative really clear. For some reason, like when you take out the color, it's a little less distracting, and then design and shapes and subject become clearer for me. And so
Yeah.
I find black and white just makes for really good storytelling. Yeah.
Absolutely. It feels, when I look at your feed, it's almost like black and white for at times can tell a more in-depth story even by you're taking out so much of the information, but you're almost zoning in on things in a
Yeah.
totally different way.
I
And it
I
like,
think you're right. Yeah. Because
yeah.
color can be
And
distracting.
there's yeah, and when you take out the color and all of a sudden, and we're going to show a clip from the class, all of a sudden you can see the depth of the shadows and the depth of the different light and the different textures, and all of a sudden the color that kind of distracts from those things really brings that out,
Yeah.
and it does sometimes tell a more dynamic story. Um, and that's what I've, searching on your feed and looking at your photography, I always feel like I can really get inside your head and what you want us to look at because you shoot so much in black and white.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Yeah, I do shoot a lot. My son's always like, Mom, why is everything dark and black and white? I'm like, ah, sorry, kid. It's just the way I see the world.
So tell us a little bit about your process when you're thinking about black and white. You have, we talked a little bit about an analog versus a digital approach to black and white. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I have to say, I think this is a dark room. It's a dark room in my hand. And so I am thinking about the zone system. I'm thinking about where are my shadows, midtones, and highlights. And I like to look at other people's work and go, great, what's evocative? Do I want blacks that are deep and heavy and let all the story be in the lights. And that's more of a traditional approach. Like I think about dodging and burning. I think about, how was it when I was hand lining black and white film, and what did I do to push the film? Do I want more grain? How do you get more grain? And I don't know if people realize that, but you have full grain control in Lightroom mode.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's absolutely crackers. You can do like a T-Max 3200 look, a rock and roll photography look, or you can do a very fine Polapan, 125 grain. I mean, it's all available in that program, but I think folks just don't know to like look under the hood, if you will.
Yeah. And that's what this class is for. So, just there's some quick filters you can do with Lightroom that are just easy black and white filters, but Lisa really goes under the hood and really shows you that, like you said, you have a dark room at your fingertips now. Tell us a little bit about, transitioning from doing things like actually being in a dark room to like having this in your hands. How does it feel to be a photographer over that arc of technology?
You know what? It's really interesting. I think I don't know if this is going to make sense, but I'll give it a go. I treat photography in Lightroom like a retoucher. And what that means for me is that I'm not afraid to manipulate. And that's how it used to be in the darkroom. Jerry Olsman was, holding his hand and dodging and burning and making composites, or Ansel Adams doing the same thing. And I feel like I do the same thing on this device. And it's because I feel I come from a retouching background where it's not sacrosanct to touch and manipulate. So I'm willing to manipulate and get in there and change it up. And so for me, digital is just a different tool, but my mindset's kind of the same.
Yeah, definitely. And I wonder, people who never grew up with a dark room. I, was of an era where we were switching from, film to digital while I was the editor of my yearbook back in high school. And so I have a very, limited experience with a dark room. But I wonder, as kids nowadays, do they even understand the the layers and nuance that really goes into what you have in your hands now? It's such an interesting concept that they can't even, you never experienced it, so you don't really know how expansive this app is now.
That's the key. I think that's a brilliant way of putting it. I think my goal is to show people how massive this program is.
Yeah.
Because I think on the surface, it's like, oh, you want to add a little color or add a little light? Oh, okay, I'm done. And it's like, oh, no, you're not done. There's so much here. Yeah.
So we're actually going to play a little clip from the class, but before we do so, I just want to remind everyone you're watching the live kickoff of Lisa Carney's brand new Lightroom mobile class that focuses on black and white photography. So if you're tuning in with us, make sure you're telling us where you're watching from, and make sure you're popping in some questions for Lisa ahead of the kickoff of the class, which will start right at 9:30 after this live stream. But if you have questions for Lisa ahead of then, drop them in the comments, and my dear friend and co-host Kenna Klosterman will be sharing them with me. So without further ado, hi Kenna. Without further ado, let's play the clip.
I'd like to walk you through this very basic edit, and I want to remind you guys that there's beauty to be found everywhere, even on this crappy little side street. When I was walking my dog, the grass looked really beautiful to me, and I just put the phone down in the grass, and it's really quite basic of an edit. So what I'm doing on this one, to make it black and white, I'm going to choose the profiles, and I can scroll through these profiles and see what kind of changes I'm getting and decide which look I like. Do I like that the sky is dark and the grass is dark? Oh, that one's pretty awful because it's too dark, but that's okay. You know what? I think I'm going to lean towards 3. And why I like 3 is the grass has some information in it, but the sky's light. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And what I want to remind you with the profiles is all these editing devices are still available. So I'm going to go to the effects, and I think I'm going to go ahead and give it some clarity and sharpness. And I think what I'd like to do is go to the color panel and check out the blues and see what happens if I darken the blues. Or lighten the blues, maybe even further. Darken, lighten. And then I really like the separation it's giving me in this. So I'm going to call that done under that color panel. And then I think I'm going to go to the selective edit for a second, and I'm going to take the paintbrush And I'm just going to click inside these blades of grass a little bit and go back to the effects and see what happens if I add just a bit more texture. Now, sometimes the contrast will get a little heavy, so I'm going to also go into the lights while I'm still in selective edit and brighten up the shadows just a hair. And then I can see about bringing down the shadows. And I can also check the exposure if I want to. Dark, yuck. Light, yuck. No, I'm going to leave the exposure where it was. You want to reset the exposure, double click on the name, and that'll set it back to 0. So let's take a look at this before and after. Now I'm just going to do a quick experiment here and go back to the color mix and see what happens if I lighten the greens up versus darkening the greens. Well, that's kind of interesting in its own weird way, but I think I'm going to lighten the greens a bit and go to the yellows. Yeah, I kind of like the yellows lightened up a little bit too. Now, occasionally, as you know, I will go to the effects panel and I will put a vignette on the outside of an image. That's a hard vignette. This is a softer vignette. But in this case, I don't want it to affect the highlights. So I'm going to scroll up and say underneath the vignette, see there's vignette, midpoint, feather, roundness, highlights. I'm going to ask it to take the vignetting off the highlights. That way it won't affect the sky. And don't forget, you can always add some grain if you want to. If you want a grainier image. Ooh, I kind of like this crop. Wait a minute. I may have just discovered something else here. I really like this tight crop. Anyway, hopefully you guys can see the magic you can do even on a crappy street corner.
All right, so that was just a little taste of what you have coming up in Lisa's new class, Lightroom Mobile, creating black and white photos. And I wanted to show this clip because in this little segment, Lisa, shows us something that we all see every day, is walking through our yards as grass, and she completely transforms what would be a typically boring shot into something that's actually interesting and tells a story. And so, Lisa, tell me a little bit about capturing this shot and, how you use black and white photography to kind of mundane scenes.
Cool. Yeah. So I'll tell you something. First of all, I have a commitment to myself. I shoot every day, period, paragraph, period. And I was getting late. I was walking my dog and I'm like, I better get that shot in. I haven't shot today. And second of all, and I talk about this in the class a little bit, I have this inspiration section where I go through and I look at people's work and see like, wow, what moves me? What do I like about their work? What is evocative? And I was looking at some Edward Weston stuff. Now, I know that shot is not an Edward Weston shot, but I liked how he kind of zoomed in onto little graphic areas of nature. And I was like, well, I'm going to try that. And it doesn't matter that I'm in this crappy street. There's something really cool there.
Yeah, exactly.
So I have to say, I kind of treat it like an exercise. Like when I went to Art Center and I was originally an illustration major, we'd have to go to the museums and draw the sculptures. And we'd have to draw from the master's work. And I try to do that with photography. I try to do exercises that I see other people's work.
Yeah. And that's just you've been a photographer for how long now?
Oof. Do I have to say?
No.
5 years? 5 years? I started when I was 12, really.
There we go.
Actually, I started when I was very young.
But, so, that what I was trying to get at was, even if you've been doing it for 20 years, you're still learning and evolving, and you're still finding ways to continue to hone your skills. And I think that's kind of the most important thing about being a creative, is that you're a lifelong learner, and there's always other creatives or new techniques coming out that allow you to continue to evolve. Like this class, you can evolve your black.
Yeah, and I'd like to say something about that, because I just like to be real about this stuff. There's been a little pushback to me about eye photography and mobile photography, and kind of disregard like, oh, that's amateur. And it's not. It's new technology. It's emerging technologies. And Lightroom, like I use Lightroom as a darkroom. And I think as creatives, it's really imperative that we continue to expand. Not reject technology, but expand into it and find out how we can make it our own.
And to your point, I think, as photographers, we have seen the technology changed so much over the last 10 to 15 years. And it's for some reason our knee-jerk reaction to act like it's worse because it's getting easier for us, or it's taking something out of the creative process because the camera's better. And I don't believe that's true at all. And I love your classes using Lightroom Mobile because you really kind of show us that there's still so much creativity and so much you do as an artist, even though you're shooting on your phone.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you said that, because this is not point and shoot photography.
No,
Yeah,
not at all. And a lot of people, when you have the phone in your hand, feel like this is just point and shoot, and you go so much deeper beyond that, and it just kind of allows us to, I don't know, rethink about how we look at technology right when it comes out, and how even though it might be making our life easier, it's actually it's not taking away the artistry at all.
Oh, if anything, it's adding to it. Because I'll say, this is a little harsh of me to say, but if you're a photographer out there and you think getting the exposure right is it, ooh, you're a little thin. Do you know what I mean? Like,
totally.
That's not the storytelling, is getting the exposure right. It's the framing, it's the contrast, it's the grain, it's the lighting situation you have. Like, I actually use lights with my mobile photography. I shoot natural light, but I also bring lights in. I just have mobile lights, that's all.
Yeah.
And it's just the start of the creative process, I think.
Absolutely. I totally agree. So I just want to do a few shout outs because we have so many people tuning in, and everyone is so excited about this new class, Lisa. We have Sweden, Los Angeles, Detroit, Colombia. Again, it's our worldwide audience, and it's so nice to see everyone tuning in, and it's so nice to have you back, and everyone's so excited to get outside and start shooting black and white mobile photography.
I can't see people's work. It's going to be awesome.
I know, and that leads me to, as a reminder, right after this live class, Lisa's new live kickoff, Lisa's new class kicks off, and it will start at 9:30 sharp. And if you are a Creative Live subscriber, you can watch the class for free for 24 hours. If you aren't a subscriber, you can purchase that class after the 24-hour stream, or you can check out the Creator Pass, which allows you to get access to our entire library. And within those classes, you can upload your own photos, and Lisa can take a look at the stuff you guys are doing. So make sure when you're out shooting, you upload to our student library so Lisa can give you some feedback and see what you guys are learning from this class. We do have a few questions coming in from the audience. So let me cue you up with a few questions. This one comes from Casey Cosley. Hi, Casey. It's so nice to have you joining the stream today. Casey is a Creative Live alumni, and so we're really happy to have him joining. Casey wants to know, he is a great photographer, and I'm just happy to have him here on the stream with us. Casey wants to know, can you tell us a little bit more about the zone system and how you use it?
Okay, so the zone system is a very broad conversation. I just want to be really clear about that. And Ants Labs came out with it. He's got an amazing book called The Negative, which talks about zone system. But it's a way of categorizing and looking at your tones from pure black to pure white and all the steps in between. And it's there's no like singular answer to the zone system, but it's about informing yourself, like, wait, am I doing a high key image? Am I doing a low key image? Are my midtones too thin? Do I want them fatter? And in fact, in the class, I go over this and we talk about the histogram, and you actually look at the histogram so you can see where your pieces are in the zone. It's a kind of a technical area, but I find it's really helpful for me to look at the quality of my image. It's a framework through which I look at my photography.
Okay, all right. And just for a novice photographer, can you tell me a little bit a difference between a high key and a low key?
Yeah. So high keys, like if you're in the upper values, the whites,
okay,
and the tones, versus a low light level, where you're in the shadows and the blacks. And it's interesting, like when you look in the inspiration section I have in this class, there's a photographer named Fan Ho who's out of Hong Kong in the 1950s. Oh my God, his work is amazing. His blacks are like, it's all black, just black, and all his information is in his lights. So he has full detail in his lights, and they're amazing. And it's a framework to look at Like if you looked at his histogram, it's like everything's on the left side and the right side, and there's nothing in the middle. Nothing. It's fantastic.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so cool. And so when you're shooting black and white, are you using your histogram a lot more than you do when you do color photography, do you
I
feel?
don't even use my histogram when I'm looking at color. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
There's no good,
yeah. I like
but with my black
that
and
was
white,
just the thought.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
And I'll
yeah.
tell you
That
a weird
that
thing I
totally
do.
makes sense.
It's kind of a technical thing, but if I'm emulating a piece of work, like I like to use other people's work as a exercise, as a sketching device. I will put their image in my Lightroom and I'll look at their histogram and then I'll do my image and I'll try to match my histogram to theirs. So it's a different way of looking at the image. Like I'm not just looking at the highlight slider or the shadow slider. I'm actually looking at what the histogram's doing to match it to the other one.
See, that's such a
Weird. That's
cool way to emulate. Like, I was actually just about to talk about emulating and looking at other artists to inspire you. And that is a way that, often when we're thinking about emulating, we're thinking about what conceptually, emulating their concept, and emulating their light is such an interesting, and looking at their histogram is such an interesting way of emulating. So
yeah.
tell us a little bit more about what that brings to your black and white process.
Well, it's interesting. I use it as quite literally as an exercise. So there's a photographer, Anne Brigman, who I love her work. And what I did is I look at her work and then I go, God, how would I make my work look like hers? And I'm not talking about subject matter. I'm literally talking about the print quality and the tones and the coloring. And I use it as an exercise so that I have muscle memory and I know how to do it. And then when I'm out creating my art, if there's something I'm like, oh, that technique would be amazing, I already know how to do it. So that when I'm doing my art, I'm not trying to figure out technique. Does that make sense? Like I'm doing my expression. And so I practice my technique outside of that.
Totally. That makes complete sense. And, that just gave me a whole new way to think about emulating and looking at other people's work.
Well, it's kind of like training, like when you train for sports.
Yeah,
I was training
absolutely.
for a marathon once, and you do these short runs, you do these long runs, you do these intermittent runs, and then you do the race. It's kind of like
Yeah. Yeah. And that's you learn to realize if you take the frameworks of a coach when you were younger and just apply them to creativity, it's really the best way to hone your skills. It's treat creativity the same way you would treat training for sports or anything else. It's an interesting concept that I don't think we as creatives necessarily think about.
Right. Like I'm actually, there's a painter, a pre-Raphaelite painter named Millet, who I am trying to figure out how to emulate his look right now in Photoshop and Lightroom, just as an exercise. And it'll turn, I find when you do that, it turns your thinking and your visioning on its head. Even if it's not a style I think I want to use, it's just like, oh, how do I do that? How would I do that?
And then suddenly you're touching on things that, your mindset wouldn't necessarily go to. And then you don't know when you're going to pull that thing that you taught yourself out when you're on your next shoot.
Exactly right.
So we have lots more questions coming in. First, I want to do a little shout out to RC Conception, who is from Syracuse and another CL instructor. Nice to have you there. So many alumni and former instructors and staff watching today. So good to see everyone. We have a question from Alvin. Do you use the Lightroom camera or just the native camera on your phone? What would be the reason I would use the Lightroom camera for black and white instead of my regular phone camera?
Excellent. So I would say 90% I use the Lightroom cameras. There's 5 cameras for an iPhone in Lightroom. They're amazing. The only time I tend to use the Apple, I'm on an iPhone 12. The Apple native app is when I'm using a low light situation, because hands down, Apple software is better at low light capture than Lightroom still, unfortunately.
And do you have a go-to Lightroom of the 5 that you like to use when you're shooting black and white, or does it change with?
No, it's subject driven. The depth capture is amazing. amazing. And I kind of go over this in the class. I really go over this in the boot camp class way more. Pro is when I use the pro camera when I have situations where my subject is moving. And the HDR when it's really still, because the HDR takes 3 frames and you don't want to move or have your subject move.
All right, that makes sense. All right, so we have just a couple minutes left of this live stream. And as a reminder, right after this live stream, Lisa's new class will kick off. It is Lightroom Mobile, creating black and white photos. So if you are watching on social, make sure you follow the link that Kenna is dropping in the comments to go watch the free stream of the class, which is available for 24 hours. And if you are watching on creativelive.com, make sure you just refresh the page and the class will start right at 9:30. We just have a couple more little shout outs. We have a fun comment from Ryan on YouTube who said he got to speak to you one-on-one once, and it was probably the most informative and inspirational hour and a half of his career. So
thank you.
That is so nice to hear. Lisa, tell us a little bit, before we sign off, tell us a little bit about why everyone should go watch this class after this.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. Again, I think it's really going to be an eye-opener because even in this class, I don't cover all of Lightroom. There is so much that you can do in the program, so much. And my classes are not prescriptive. I am not like, oh, you want to, where's Waldo? And you paint A and B and C. I am definitely about, this is how this machine, this darkroom works so that you can go get your own looks. So I think people will find it pretty informative and not prescriptive.
Great. So again, thank you all for tuning in. And just so everyone knows, we have another class coming out next week with Lisa, and it is transitioning. And I'm super excited about this class. We're going to learn how to transition day photos into night photos. And Lisa, we've talked about this a lot. Who wants to actually go out and shoot at night? If you can learn how to shoot during the day and make it look like night, that's pretty awesome. It makes our lives a lot easier, right?
Yeah. Well, also the technical diffuse, because the camera still doesn't, the mobile device doesn't do low light shooting well. It just doesn't.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a technical issue.
So
also,
everyone make sure you have RSVP to that class. It's coming out next week, and you will see me and Lisa at another live kickoff for that class. And without further ado, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into this episode, and make sure you head over to watch the class. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, you guys. Thank you so much.
Pursuing creativity is arguably the most practical thing that you can do.
We humans are adaptation champions. That's what makes us human, our ability to imagine.
The hard part is to look inside and say, what are my invisible beliefs that I have about money? I wanted to figure out how it actually worked.
And you are really here because you became passionate about an idea.
What does it take to capture great photographs of birds? You have to be grounded in your cameras. You need to understand the technology.
Just like any band shoot, we're looking to capture great shots of the band themselves playing on stage. So the drummer shot, lead singer, guitars.
How do you even prepare to shoot with your phone? And then we're actually going to go into the edit.
Once you hit rock bottom, there's no place to go but up. You learn what's real. You learn what's needed.
In astrophotography, there is a great deal more planning involved because you are literally shooting in the dark.
We can't change others, but we can change our perspective.
Wow, that's a good way to start the day.
I had tears in my eyes.
If you're feeling isolated and looking for creative connection, try tuning into creativelive.com/TV. That's where we've got a 24/7 live stream from the kitchen counters.
I can do that backlit shot that I really like to do.
From the studios and living rooms of many of the world's top creators, where we're doing musical performances, Q&As, cooking shows, virtual book tour events, drawing, spoken word poetry, and more.
Life passed me by waiting for an invitation when the world is greater than my nation or my occupation. Be someone you've never been. You feel all that adrenaline, it's medicine.
It actually helps me feel like my days are more purposeful.
I hope that out of this deep pain will come some collective growth.
Dive into Creative Live TV today.